What if Arthur lived?
What if the gang died on Guarma?
What if Sadie and Charles never left John?
What if the Saint Denis bank robbery was successful?
What if Arthur didn't break him out?
All these questions will be answered in today's video. Red Dead What If. There's countless events within the Red Dead story that make you ask the question, what if it didn't happen? These events shape the story into the depressing tale of Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. Though these events would have changed the story, it's important to realize that a happier ending does not mean a better ending. The narrative Rockstar was trying to create does not fit a happy ending, nor should it cater to one. Today we'll simply ask, what if these events had different outcomes?
What if the gang died on Guarma? Imagine this scenario. Dutch, Arthur, Micah, Bill, and Javier all either killed or captured on that island. What does this mean for the others back home? All of the Vanderlyn gang's muscle is gone, leaving those back in the swamps of Lemoyne without a leader, reliable guns, or money. With Dutch gone, the role of leadership would likely fall to Charles or Sadie, both being the most capable leaders. Their best hope for survival would be to abandon their hideout in Lemoyne, avoiding all law agencies and rival gangs, and head north as fast as possible. Yet, escaping the Pinkertons' clutches would nearly be impossible at this point. The Pinkertons already have the gang cornered, and without their muscle, the remaining weaker half of the gang have no clear path to safety. They are literally backed into a corner with nowhere to run. But on the other hand, would the Pinkertons even bother chasing the rest of the gang? With Mac, Davey, Sean, Hosea, Lenny, John, and the boys on the island all gone, the gang is effectively broken. Plus, the probability of the gang committing another violent crime, assuming they somehow make it out of Lemoyne in the first place, is virtually zero. They would likely be struggling to survive without their core members and resources. So in my scenario, the gang would likely disband, spared by the Pinkertons, with each member trying to carve out a new future for themselves. Charles might return to his life of wandering, and Sadie could strike out on her own. And for the rest of the members, stripped of their support systems, they'll likely try to blend back into society. But that's all from me. Thank you Sigma Waxy for having me on this video, and peace.
What if the Saint Denis bank robbery was successful? Following the theme of fixing the Vanderlyn gang's immense mistakes, this time it's the botched failure that was the Saint Denis bank robbery. Committed in Chapter 4, the robbery of the Lemoyne National Bank involved the most prominent members of the Vanderlyn gang. Most of the men and Abigail Roberts were split into two teams. Hosea, Matthews, and Abigail would cause a distraction in the middle of town, while Arthur Morgan, Javier Escuela, Bill Williamson, Charles Smith, Lenny Summers, Micah Bell, John Marston, and Dutch Vanderlyn would directly assault the bank. From here forward, the robbery seemingly goes to plan. All the gold and cash is cleaned out of the vaults and the hostages were quiet. However, this is when shit hits the fan. An army of Pinkertons surrounds the bank while head agent Andrew Milton holds Hosea hostage. After a failed negotiation, Hosea is executed on the spot. A massive gunfight ensues, resulting in another Vanderlyn casualty. Lenny Summers is executed on the rooftops, leading the remaining gang to retreat in failure. In order to escape Saint Denis, which was crawling with policemen and agents, the remaining Vanderlyns must board a boat departing to the Caribbean. With this summary, it's easy to see where the robbery went horribly wrong. However, adding context from previous missions, the entire robbery was a bad idea from the jump. Saint Denis was already hot from the Charlie robbery and Bronte's murder. Given this, the smartest idea would have been to escape further south or north until the heat died down. But Saint Dutch and Hosea were adamant on committing this robbery, but this time the right way. Instead of a loud and serious approach, the best idea would be to do a silent hit. This time it would allow the gang to take as long as they need to clear the bank and avoid detection by the law. They would have had time to return to camp, gather supplies, and collect the rest of the Vanderlyns. From here they could escape to the Caribbean, this time properly prepared. The time in Tahiti would be well funded and good for most of their health. Arthur would still grow weak from his fight with tuberculosis and eventually pass due to the humid environment. Hosea would share a similar fate since he also has an undisclosed lung disease. While this would be a better ending compared to what actually happened, there's still a lot of undetermined factors that were ignored for this to happen. Earlier I mentioned the failed trolley robbery and Bronte's death, but there's also the factor of Milton's trap. Agent Milton had been watching and tracking the Van der Linde gang for a while now, meaning he knew their goals and behaviors. This would allow Milton to plan ahead and set up a perimeter around the Lemoore National Bank. From here, all the Pinkertons would need to do is wait for the gang to move in. So while there was a window of success during this robbery, there were still many factors that made achieving this feat nearly impossible. That's just speculation, however, so feel free to comment your own thoughts down below. This was Duke Miser, and thank you for watching.
What if Sadie and Charles never left John? As we know, after the events of RDR2, Charles and Sadie both left the United States to pursue their respective interests. Charles is believed to have gone to Canada and Sadie to somewhere in South America. When Agent Ross finds John at Beecher's Hope, he forces John into the events of RDR1. When he forces John to hunt down the former Van der Linde gang members like Javier and Bill, John is alone. Although John manages to solo the entire Mexican military and Bill Williamson's gang, granted he had some help from Marshall Johnson, imagine what he would have been able to do with the help of Sadie and Charles. First off, if Sadie and Charles were present when John first confronted Bill in RDR1, I believe that he wouldn't have been shot, or at least the scene would have played out a bit differently. If John was never shot, Bonnie McFarlane would have never met John. That means that John wouldn't spend the first 25% of the game playing Ranch Hand Simulator. If Sadie and Charles were present, I also believe that John wouldn't have to be running around doing favors for people such as Marshall Johnson, Irish, Seth, and Nigel West Dickens. John, Sadie, and Charles would probably be enough to take down Fort Mercer. The only issue is that Irish is the one that got John across the border into Mexico to find Javier. So what would John do? How would he get into Mexico? Well, he would probably just cross the border any other way. There's a bridge south of Fort Mercer that crosses straight into Mexico after all. While in Mexico, John might still have to do some favors for DeSanta and Reyes to get some information about Javier. But I don't think that DeSanta will be able to betray John just as easily as he did in RDR1. From there, the story remains pretty much the same. They are able to catch Javier and Dutch. But there is one thing that changes. The ending of RDR1. In RDR1's canon, John dies after his ranch gets raided by the military and he's gunned down. But in this alternate reality, things might happen a bit differently. John by himself did a great job of defending his ranch and family from the army. With help from Uncle and Jack, he is able to take out a large number of soldiers. If Charles and Sadie were there, I do think that there is a slight chance that they are able to survive this first raid on Beecher's Hope. I think that just like in the canon story, Uncle dies, and in this version of the story, maybe Charles or Sadie does as well. After this, the remaining survivors flee to another state or another country to escape the government. I can see Charles taking John and his family to Canada, or Sadie taking them to South America. I'm GoFever, and this is my What If. Enjoy the rest of the video.
Hello everyone, my name's CJ Haven, and today I'll be going over a what if that's honestly been on my mind for quite a while. So, you know when Arthur has to break Micah out of jail in chapter 2? Well, what if Arthur didn't break him out and instead just left him for dead? Right off the bat, we're going to take what I said quite literally. You know, left him for dead? Yeah, because if you remember correctly, the Pinkertons were planning on hanging him not even a day before Arthur saved him from imprisonment. With Micah dead, the entire story could or would potentially change. As we all know, Micah is very manipulative, even going as far as to blatantly lie to get his way. That inevitably leads Dutch to making a lot of large and most importantly, dire decisions within the story. Realistically, most of the story would basically stay the same up until chapter 5. Upon arriving back from Guarma, the gang sets up camp in Lake, serving as a temporary refuge following the devastating events of the Saint Denis bank robbery. Without Micah ratting on the gang, the Pinkertons wouldn't have been able to locate them as quickly, if not at all. This would have given the gang a good amount of time to recuperate and come up with a new plan. Given Arthur's distaste towards unnecessary violence, at least later in the game, this plan likely wouldn't have involved robbing and killing Leviticus Cornwall. With the murder of Leviticus Cornwall being avoided, that would give the gang even more time to recuperate and come up with a new plan, especially considering the Pinkertons wouldn't be breathing down their necks. Following that, that, the gang would have never had to make the hasty decision of blowing up the bridge, which honestly takes a pretty considerate amount of time away from more beneficial things they could have or would have been doing. Now, just because things seem to be going a lot better doesn't mean everything's a-okay. As we all know, Dutch starts getting more and more insane as the chapters go on. This stems from a lot of things, most notably the trolley accident and Hosea's death. With those two events still taking place, Dutch would still not be in the healthiest headspace, leading to a couple of events still occurring. One of those would be the reckless train robbery that takes place near the end of chapter 6. However, the dynamic during this event would likely be much different. For instance, without Micah and his little buddies Cleet and Joe breathing down Dutch's neck, John wouldn't have been left for dead. John being left for dead is a big reason why the gang inevitably gets divided and has that big standoff, so it's safe to say that would have never happened in this new turn of events. A question that a lot of you probably have on your mind is, what would have happened? Can't tell you for sure, but I do have a pretty good theory. If you remember correctly, Hosea's initial plan was to go north due to it being safer up there. It's safe to assume that Arthur would have stepped up as the leader of the gang, given Dutch's many mental issues. Dutch simply wouldn't have been suited to lead the gang anymore, and I'm pretty sure a good portion of the gang would have agreed. With Arthur in control, he likely would have followed Hosea's initial plan. I mean, it would have been the safest route to take. Now, there is one major plot point I haven't covered so far, that being Arthur's fatal diagnosis. Considering Micah had absolutely no part in that, it's safe to say that Arthur would have still contracted tuberculosis. His inevitable death would then lead to someone else taking up the mantle. In my opinion, if anyone should take up the mantle, it should be John. He and Arthur were really close towards the end, and John honestly has very similar morals when compared to Arthur's. Another suitable choice would have been Sadie. You could pretty much apply what I said about John to her as well. One thing I'm still wondering about is, what then? I mean, we can't really theorize what would happen after the gang went up north because there really isn't anything to go off of, considering they never actually ended up going north. A question that's really pounding in my head is how all of these changes would affect the overall story of Red Dead Redemption. The whole point of the game is John hunting down some of his old gang members after the split, due to him being blackmailed by the Pinkertons. With the split not taking place anymore, how would the game even play out? Considering how Dutch would still be experiencing mental decline, it's safe to assume that he would inevitably decide to leave the gang, or possibly do something worse than that. Red Dead Redemption could honestly still follow a similar plotline, with the exception of a couple things. For one, Bill and Javier likely wouldn't have played as big a role in the story, that is if they played any role at all. If they were to be included in the game, they'd probably be on John's side this time around. I mean, what reason would they have not to be? They may even end up just disappearing off the face of the earth like a lot of the other gang members. As for John being blackmailed by the Pinkertons, that would still make sense in the grand scheme of things. You've got to remember, just because a lot of major events didn't take place in this scenario doesn't mean anything, considering all the other monstrosities that still apply. The Blackwater Massacre would be a great example of that. Even after all those years, the gang, or more specifically, the leader of the gang, would still be wanted at large. Alright, I'm starting to feel like I'm just going in circles here, so I'm gonna wrap this up before it drags on too long. The thing with theorizing is that it can lead to a ton of confusion, but it's also really exciting to imagine the possibilities. What do you all think? Do you have any theories or ideas regarding this what if? If you do, drop them in the comments, I'd love to see them. Bye.
The Vanderlyn gang's demise was because of several reasons, like a rat in the midst, Pinkertons on their tail, and the several crimes they committed, but also because of the death of one of their most key members, Hosea Matthews. Throughout the game, several members die in the most brutal and bloody of ways. Hosea isn't an exception, as he died by being shot in the streets of Saint Denis by Agent Milton. That point in the game can be considered the point of no return, and when everything essentially changes for the gang. When returning from Guarma, walking around camp isn't the same anymore, and neither is the hierarchy. All the principles of the gang had set over the decades on the run seem to disappear in just 2 chapters. Now, what if Hosea didn't go with Abigail to distract the Saint Denis police? What if he stayed alive and ventured with the gang to Guarma and returned? Would the gang not have turned on each other? Let me tell you. The robbery would have proceeded as expected, with John getting captured and Lenny getting killed, which would have upset Hosea as he saw himself in Lenny, as we saw through several camp interactions. Hosea would have then, along with the gang, hopped on the boat out of Saint Denis. The boat sinking would have gone as followed, but Hosea would have struggled heavily to get out. After reuniting with Arthur on the shores of Guarma, he would have been captured along with Javier and put in jail. The rest of the Guarma chapter would have gone just as in the game, with Hosea assisting the gang and keeping Dutch still sane, which wouldn't have had Dutch kill that old lady in the cave. After returning back to mainland America, the gang would reunite and find a better camp spot in Beaver Hollow, possibly close to the Wapiti Reservation in the East Grizzlies. With Hosea still alive, Micah wouldn't turn Dutch against Arthur, and the gang this way could have carried on robbing and doing jobs, although they are extremely wounded. The gang would have definitely still went forward with the train robbery, and then been ambushed by the Pinkertons, where Hosea would have been killed, finally, by none other than Micah, completely destroying Dutch and having him step onto Arthur's side instead of Micah's. This would leave the gang barely alive and possibly close to being disbanded.
What if Arthur lived? Maybe the most asked what if question in the Red Dead community. The death of Arthur Morgan shapes the entire story of Red Dead Redemption going forward. Without his death, the story would likely branch into a different timeline, one in which he leaves with John and lives the life he wanted to with Mary Linton. But first, let's go back to when Arthur contracted tuberculosis. In Chapter 2, Arthur collects debt money from a man named Thomas Downs. This man passes the disease on to Arthur when he coughs in his face. But all this could have been avoided if Arthur simply didn't go, letting another gang member take the job. If he did, he would have been in otherwise perfect health. The story pretty much stays the same, although Arthur would never feel real regret from taking money from Thomas Downs. In other words, he would have never had his redemption. Despite this, he would still be alive and well to face off against Micah in the last mission of Chapter 6, Red Dead Redemption. In this scenario, I believe Arthur would either leave with John or fight Micah. In the final game, he stays behind to fight off the Pinkertons to give John a chance to escape. He essentially sacrificed his life for John's safety. I still believe his sickness had a large impact on his decision to stay back. Even if he ran with John, he wouldn't last much longer, which would be different in this scenario. Arthur is in perfect health and doesn't need to sacrifice himself. He could help John find his family and possibly move on from what was the Vanderlyn gang, settling down with Mary Linton and getting the ending he might not deserve, but wanted. Or he might want revenge. In an unlikely series of events, Arthur would stay back to hunt down Micah. Feeling betrayed, he would kill off the rat who destroyed his family, and in good health, Arthur would likely do that. But there's one question that remains. What would Dutch do? After finding Micah's lifeless body with a bloody Arthur, would Dutch do anything to stop Arthur, or would he simply walk away like he does in the final game? Either way, Arthur makes it out alive. But the butterfly effect of killing Micah would actually save John's life. See, if Arthur doesn't kill Micah, John would most likely still go after him in 1907, meaning the former Pinkertons would still find John at Beecher's Hope, and the events of Red Dead 1 staying pretty much the same, ending with the death of John Marston. But there's a big change in this scenario. Would John have to hunt down Arthur? We know Agent Ross sends John to hunt down his former gang members, so would Arthur be on Agent Ross's radar? The reason why Ross has John kill or capture Bill, Javier, and Dutch was simply because they were still living the outlaw lifestyle, still robbing and killing in the big 1911, something I doubt Arthur would still be doing after he settled down with Mary. But if Arthur's whereabouts were known to the government agents, John would definitely have to confront Arthur, in which case John has two choices: give Arthur up to the government or let him leave. The obvious answer is letting him live to see another day, but if he does, he risks Agent Ross not believing his story and John not being able to see his family again. Then again, Arthur was the reason why John survived all those years ago. John turning him in would be a huge betrayal, but a necessary one. I want to hear your opinions on the ending to Arthur's story. Would John turn Arthur in or let him go? This all stems from Arthur letting Micah live. But if Arthur kills Micah in 1899, every gang member gets a good ending, even if they don't deserve one. It's possible the government would still find John, but without him leaving clues behind when going after Micah, it's possible he never has to hunt down Dutch, Javier, and Bill, leaving everyone in the Vanderlyn gang alive in 1911.